A Hell's Angel refused to leave a boy, and his injured mother. Behind the rain started soft, just a whisper against Tank Morrison's leather jacket, the kind of rain that didn't mean much yet, but promised more was coming. He rode at the back of the pack, where he always rode, watching over 40-some bikes stretched out ahead of him like a dark ribbon on the wet road. Chrome caught what little light pushed through the clouds. Engines rumbled low and steady, a sound Tank had loved since he was 19 years old and figured he'd love until the day he died. The charity toy run was done for another year. Behind him, back at the children's hospital, there were boxes and boxes of stuffed animals and building blocks and dolls, all stacked up in the lobby where the nurses would sort them out come Monday morning. Tank had watched a little girl with no hair and tubes running out of her arm pick out a stuffed elephant like it was the greatest treasure in the world. He'd had to look away for a second, because 45 years old or not, some things still got him right in the chest. He liked this part of the day best, actually. Not the giving, though that mattered plenty. It was this, right here, the ride home. The pack moving together like one big animal. Everybody tired in that good way. Everybody quiet because there wasn't much left to say. A man could think out here. A man could just be. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Big Mike rode up ahead of him, and past Big Mike was Sully and Ortiz and Deacon, and further up somewhere was Church, who'd started the toy run 12 years back with nothing but a milk crate full of hand-me-down toys strapped to his sissy bar. Now it was a whole production, corporate sponsors and news cameras and everything. Tank figured Church would have kept doing it even if it stayed just him and that milk crate. That was the kind of man he was. The sky had been gray all day, heavy and low, the kind of sky that sat on your shoulders. Now it was making good on its threats. The rain picked up, no longer a whisper but a steady drumming on Tank's helmet, little needles finding the gaps in his jacket collar. He didn't mind it much. 20 years of riding taught a man to make peace with weather. You couldn't fight it, so you just let it happen to you, and kept your eyes on the road. Up ahead, the pack started to break apart the way it always did this far out from the clubhouse, bikes peeling off one by one toward their own homes, their own beds, their own lives waiting for them. Big Mike lifted 2 fingers off his handlebar in a lazy wave before he turned north. Sully and Ortiz split off together toward the highway. Church gave one long blast of his horn, his signal for a job well done. And then he was gone too, tail light swallowed up by the gray curtain of rain. That left Tank alone at a fork in the road, same as it did most Saturdays. Most of the brothers took the highway home, the faster road, the road with streetlights and gas stations and other cars to keep a man company. Tank always took the back road instead. It cut through the woods, past the old Miller farm and the creek that ran high in the spring, and it added maybe 15 minutes to his ride. But it was quiet out there, and quiet was something Tank had learned to treasure over the years. Too many nights in his younger days had been loud, angry, full of noise he was trying to drown out. Now he sought the silence on purpose. He turned onto the back road, the rain coming down harder now, fat drops that stung against his face beneath his open helmet visor. Thunder rolled somewhere far off, low and rumbling, like the sky was clearing its throat. Tank leaned into the curves he knew by heart, muscle memory guiding the bike through turns worn smooth by 2 decades of the same route. The trees pressed close on both sides, black and dripping, their branches heavy with rainwater. The storm was really settling in now. Lightning flickered somewhere behind the clouds, lighting them up from the inside like a lantern behind cloth. Tank slowed some, more out of respect for the slick road than any real worry. He'd ridden through worse. That was when his headlight caught something up ahead that made his stomach drop. Skid marks, black and violent against the wet asphalt, cutting a long, ugly gash across both lanes. And past them, glinting silver and twisted, the guardrail was broken clean through, bent outward like something had punched a hole straight through the world. Tank hit the brakes hard, gravel and wet leaves spraying out from under his tires as he pulled the bike onto the shoulder. His heart was already pounding before his boots hit the ground. 20 years of riding had taught him to read a wreck fast. And this one was bad. Real bad. He killed the engine and swung off the bike in one motion, leaving his helmet hanging off the handlebar. The rain was coming down in sheets now, cold and relentless, soaking through his jacket in seconds. He didn't feel it. All his attention was locked on the car in the ditch, a small silver sedan that had rolled at least once from the look of the crushed roof, now resting on its side against a tree with steam hissing up from the crumpled hood. That was when he heard it. A high, thin voice, cracking with fear, screaming a word over and over. "Mom! Mom, wake up, please!" Tank's boots hit the mud, and he was running before he even decided to run, sliding down the short embankment towards the wreck. Up close, the damage was worse than it looked from the road. The driver's side door was caved in like a fist had punched straight through it, folded in on itself in a way that made Tank's stomach turn. Glass was scattered everywhere, catching what little light there was, and throwing it back like scattered diamonds in the mud. A boy, no older than 8, stood on the passenger side of the car, soaked to the bone, pounding both small fists against the window glass. His hair was plastered flat against his forehead, his lips a pale shade of blue, and his whole body shook, though whether from the cold or the fear or both, Tank couldn't say. "Hey!" Tank called out, loud enough to cut through the rain and thunder. "Hey, kid, look at me!" The boy spun around, and for a second, pure terror flashed across his face at the sight of Tank, a huge man in black leather looming up out of the storm. Tank understood that look. He'd seen it plenty of times before, on strangers who took one glance at his size and his tattoos and his beard and decided he was something to be scared of. He didn't have time to soften himself up now. There wasn't time for anything except getting to that woman. "My name's Tank," he said, dropping his voice as low and steady as he could manage while still being heard over the rain. "I'm here to help. What's your name, buddy?" "Danny," the boy stammered. His teeth were chattering hard enough that Tank could hear them click together. "My mom, she won't wake up. She won't wake up and the door won't open, and I tried so hard I can't get her out." Okay, Danny. You did good. You did everything right." Tank moved past him toward the driver's side, crouching down to get a look through the shattered window. His chest tightened at what he saw. A young woman, maybe late 20s, was slumped sideways against the crushed door, her head resting at an angle that made his pulse spike with worry. Blood ran in a thin line down the side of her face from a gash above her eyebrow, mixing with the rain that had found its way inside through the broken glass. Her chest rose and fell, shallow but steady. Breathing. Alive. "Ma'am?" Tank said, reaching a hand through the broken window, careful of the jagged glass still clinging to the frame. He pressed 2 fingers gently against her neck, feeling for a pulse. It was there, quick and thready, but there. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" No response. She was out cold. Danny had come up beside him now, close enough that Tank could feel the boy trembling against his arm. "Is she gonna die?" Danny whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Not today," Tank said, and he meant it with everything in him. though he had no earthly way of knowing yet if that was a promise he could keep. He gripped the door handle and pulled with everything his big frame could give it. The metal groaned, but didn't budge, crushed inward against the frame, trapping her inside as surely as a cage. Tank pulled his phone from his jacket pocket, his thick fingers fumbling with it for a second before he got a grip. The screen was slick with rain, but the numbers still lit up bright in the dark. He punched in 911 and pressed the phone to his ear, holding it there with his shoulder while he kept 2 fingers against the woman's neck, checking her pulse again and again, like it might slip away if he stopped paying attention. "Danny," he said, not looking away from her face. "Come here. Talk to your mom. Hold her hand through the window. Let her know you're here." Danny didn't need telling twice. He scrambled up beside Tank, reaching a small, shaking hand through the broken glass, careful the way you'd expect a scared kid to be careful, and wrapped his fingers around his mother's limp hand. "Mom, it's me," he said, his voice cracking. "It's Danny. Please wake up. Please." The line clicked. A woman's voice, calm and practiced, came through. 911, what's your emergency?" "I need an ambulance," Tank said, keeping his own voice steady, the way he'd learned to do a long time ago when things went sideways and somebody had to be the calm one. "Car accident. Single vehicle, off Route 9 near the old mill road. Female driver, unconscious. Pulse is weak and thready. There's a gash on her head, bleeding pretty good. She's trapped. Driver's door is crushed in and won't open. There's a kid with her. He's out of the car, cold and scared, but looks okay." "Sir, can you tell me your name?" "Tank Morrison." "Okay, Mr. Morrison. I need you to stay on the line with me. Help is being dispatched now." The rain kept hammering down, drumming against the hood of the wrecked car, against Tank's shoulders, against the mud beneath his knees. He shifted so his body blocked some of the wind coming off the woman, though he knew it wasn't doing much good with the door still open at the frame, and the whole car tipped at that ugly angle. "Mom," Danny kept saying, over and over, his small voice thin and scared. "Mom, please, please wake up." The woman's eyelids fluttered, just barely, at the sound of her son's voice. A small, choked noise came from her throat, not quite words, but something. Danny's whole face lit up like someone had switched on a light behind his eyes. "She heard me! Mom, I'm here! Tank's here too, he's gonna get you out!" Tank felt something tighten in his chest at those words, the boy's blind trust already forming, like Tank was already someone Danny believed in. He didn't have time to think much on it. He turned his attention back to the phone. "How far out are they?" he asked. "She's losing time here." There was a pause on the other end, just long enough that Tank's stomach dropped before the dispatcher even spoke. "Mr. Morrison, I need you to stay calm for me. We've got a problem. The storm tonight washed out the Millers Creek Bridge. It's the only way into town from where you are. Emergency crews are having to reroute all the way around through the county line. Best estimate I'm getting right now is 2 hours, maybe a little more depending on road conditions." Tank's jaw locked tight. 2 hours. "I know that's not what you want to hear, sir. Is there any way you can keep her stable until they arrive? Keep pressure on the wound. Keep her warm if you can." Tank didn't answer right away. He looked down at the woman's face through the shattered window, pale as chalk under the rain, blood still trickling slow from the gash above her eyebrow, her breathing shallow and quick like a bird's heartbeat. Danny's hand was still wrapped around hers, his small knuckles white with how hard he was holding on. 2 hours. Tank had seen enough in his life. Enough fights, enough hard nights, enough blood to know what a pulse like that meant when it started to fade. She didn't have 2 hours. Maybe she didn't even have one. "Yeah," he said into the phone, though his eyes never left her face. "Yeah, I hear you." But even as the words left his mouth, something inside him was already turning over, already refusing the answer he'd just been given. He hung up the phone and shoved it back in his pocket. 2 hours wasn't an option. It never had been. Not really. Not since he'd seen her face through that broken window. Tank stood up, his knees cracking from the cold and the years, and stepped back from the car. He ran a hand through his wet hair, water streaming down his face, and looked at the crushed metal like it was a puzzle he had to solve fast. The door was bent inward, folded like paper around the frame, pinning the woman's leg and side against the seat. The frame itself was twisted where the car had rolled once before, landing hard against the tree. "Tank!" Danny's voice was small behind him. "What are we gonna do?" Tank didn't answer right away. He walked a slow circle around the wreck, studying the angles, the way the metal had crumpled, looking for a weak point. He'd pulled men out of burning cars before, back in his younger days, back when he ran with a rougher crowd and didn't think twice about danger. His body remembered things his mind had almost forgotten. He crouched down by the door and pressed both palms flat against the frame where it met the hinge. He took a breath, deep and slow, the kind of breath a man takes before he does something that might break him in half. "Stand back, kid," he said. Danny scrambled back a few feet, eyes wide, rain dripping off his nose. Tank planted his boots in the mud, squared his shoulders, and pulled. The metal screamed. It was a sound like nothing Danny had ever heard, a groan of steel fighting against itself. And for a second, nothing happened at all, just Tank's arms shaking, his teeth gritted, veins standing out along his neck like ropes. Then, slow at first, the door began to give. Metal bent where it hadn't wanted to bend. Rust flaked off in orange chips that mixed with the rain running down Tank's forearms. "Come on," Tank growled through his teeth. Not to Danny, not really to anyone. Just to the door, just to whatever was left in him that still had fight in it. "Come on." With one last pull, something snapped inside the frame, and the door tore free with a shriek, swinging open at an angle it was never built to open. Tank staggered back a step, breathing hard, his hands raw and bleeding from the sharp edges of the metal. But the door was open. The woman's leg was free. Danny stood there with his mouth hanging open, rain running down his face, looking at Tank like he'd just watched a man move a mountain with his bare hands. "How'd you do that?" Danny whispered. Tank didn't answer. He didn't have time for talk. He dropped to his knees beside the car, checking the woman over fast, his eyes catching on the source of all that blood. Her side. A jagged piece of metal from the doorframe had torn into her, just below her ribs, and the blood was coming out steady. Too steady, in a way that made Tank's stomach turn cold. He didn't hesitate. He shrugged out of his leather jacket, the one he'd worn on 1,000 rides, the one with his club's patch stitched into the back, and he wrapped it tight around her middle, pulling it snug, tying the sleeves together hard enough to make her groan, even through her unconsciousness. "That's good," Tank muttered, more to himself than anyone. "That's good. That means you're still in there." He looked up at Danny, who was standing frozen, watching everything with wide, terrified eyes. "Listen to me," Tank said, and something in his voice made Danny snap to attention. "We're not waiting for that ambulance. It's not coming in time. You understand me?" Danny nodded, though his chin was trembling. "I'm gonna carry your mom, and you're gonna stay right by my side the whole way. We're walking out of here, through those woods, straight to the hospital. It's not close, but I know these roads better than anybody, and I'm not leaving either one of you out here. Not tonight. Not ever." Danny's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded again, harder this time. "Okay," Tank said. gathering Sarah gently into his arms, cradling her against his chest like she weighed nothing at all. "Let's go, kid. Stay close." The trees swallowed them whole. Tank stepped off the road and into the woods, boots sinking into mud with every step, Sarah's weight pulling at his arms like a stone. He shifted her higher against his chest, tucked her head into the crook of his shoulder to keep the rain off her face, and pushed forward. Branches clawed at his sleeves. Roots tried to trip him. He kept walking. Behind him, Danny splashed through puddles, his sneakers soaked through, his teeth chattering hard enough that Tank could hear them over the rain. "Stay close," Tank called back, not turning his head. "Don't wander off the path, you hear me?" "I hear you," Danny said, voice shaking. The rain came down through gaps in the canopy in long silver ropes, hammering the leaves above them, dripping onto Tank's neck and running down his back. He'd walked worse roads than this. He'd walked through worse storms, carried heavier things than 110 pounds of woman and grief. But none of it had mattered, like this mattered. None of it had ever felt like his whole chest was a fist clenched around a single thought. Don't stop, don't stop, don't stop. Sarah stirred against him, a soft moan escaping her lips, and Tank looked down at her pale face, rain beading on her eyelashes. "Almost there," he lied, because it was the kind of lie a person needed to hear, even half-conscious, even barely alive. "Almost there, darlin'. You just hang on." The path narrowed, and Tank had to turn sideways to fit between two trees, careful not to knock Sarah's legs against the bark. Behind him, Danny's footsteps grew slower. Tank noticed it the way he noticed everything, a change in rhythm, a change in weight, the sound of a boy losing his fight against the cold. "You doing okay back there?" Tank asked. "Yeah," Danny said, though his voice cracked on the word. They kept going. 10 minutes, 20. The rain didn't let up, and the mud got thicker, sucking at their shoes, slowing them down no matter how hard they pushed. Tank's arms burned, his shoulders screamed. He ignored all of it, because there was no room in him for pain right now, only room for the next step, and the one after that. Danny started talking again, the way he had before, words tumbling out fast and nervous. He talked about his mom's necklace, about school, about a dog he used to have. Tank let him talk. It kept the boy's mind moving, kept his legs moving too, one foot in front of the other, even as his voice grew thinner and more tired with every sentence. Then, all at once, the talking stopped. Tank glanced back over his shoulder just in time to see Danny stumble, his knees buckling beneath him, his small body folding into the mud like a puppet with its strings cut. "Danny!" Tank's voice cracked through the rain like a whip. He turned as fast as he could without jostling Sarah too hard, dropping down onto one knee beside the boy. Danny's lips had gone a pale shade of blue, his whole body shivering in violent waves, his eyes fluttering, fighting to stay open. "I can't," Danny whispered, tears mixing with the rain on his face. "I can't walk anymore. I'm sorry, Tank." Hey, look at me." Tank's voice softened, the gruffness melting into something gentler, something almost fatherly. "You got nothing to be sorry for, you hear me? Nothing." He looked around, taking stock of what he had, what he could do. He couldn't carry them both at once, not through this mud, not up this path. But he wasn't about to leave the boy behind either, not for 1 second, not even to catch his breath. Tank shifted Sarah carefully, testing the weight, testing his own strength, and then he crouched low, his knee sinking into the wet earth. "Climb on my back," he said. "Wrap your arms around my neck and hold tight. I've got you both. I'm not leaving either one of you out here. Not tonight." Danny's small arms shook as he pulled himself up, wrapping tight around Tank's neck, his frozen cheek pressing against the wet leather of Tank's shirt. Tank rose to his feet, a boy on his back and a woman in his arms, and started walking again into the rain. The rain kept falling, but Danny's voice came back, small and shaky against Tank's shoulder. "My mom has a necklace," he said, teeth still chattering. "A little wolf. Silver. She never takes it off, not ever. Not even in the shower, I don't think." "That right?" Tank said, mostly to keep the boy talking, keep his mind off the cold, off the pain, off how far they still had to go. "Yeah." Danny sniffed, his arms tightening around Tank's neck. "She says it's magic. Says it keeps bad things away. My grandma gave it to her before she died. And my grandma got it from a man who loved her a long, long time ago, before my mom was even born." Tank's boots kept moving through the mud, one step, then another, but something in his chest had gone very still, like a held breath. "A man," Tank repeated, careful to keep his voice even. "She say what kind of man?" "I don't know." Danny's voice was fading, worn thin by cold and exhaustion. "Mom said he loved her grandma more than anything. Said he gave it to her under some tree and told her it would keep her safe forever. But then he went away. Nobody knows why. Mom said her grandma never really got over it. Kept the necklace anyway, passed it down." The forest seemed to close in tighter around Tank, the rain suddenly louder in his ears, hammering against leaves, against his own skull. "Tank?" Danny mumbled. "You're walking kinda slow." But Tank had stopped. His boots were planted in the mud, water running in rivers around them, and he could not make himself take another step. He knew that story. He had lived that story. 20 years ago, under an old oak tree behind the Callahan estate, he had pressed a small silver wolf pendant into Ruthie's palm and told her it would keep her safe, that no matter what her family said about him, no matter how many doors they slammed in his face, he would always come back for her. He never got the chance. Her father had seen to that. A threat, a bribe, a forged letter that broke Ruthie's heart in Tank's own handwriting, words he never wrote, promises he never made. He'd been told she'd married someone else, told she'd forgotten him. He'd spent 20 years believing it, burying it, riding roads at night just to keep from thinking about that oak tree and the girl who used to wait for him under it. Rain dripped off his jaw. His arms, still locked tight around Sarah, began to tremble, though not from the weight of her anymore. "Tank." Danny's voice cracked with worry now, sensing something had changed. "Why'd you stop?" Tank didn't answer. He looked down at the woman in his arms, at her pale face, her closed eyes, the dark hair plastered to her cheek by rain. And there, around her neck, half hidden by the collar of her soaked shirt, was a thin silver chain. He hadn't noticed it before, hadn't let himself look too close, too busy counting steps and fighting the mud. But now his eyes found it, and his whole body went cold in a way the storm had nothing to do with. A small silver wolf pendant, catching what little light slipped through the clouds. "No," he whispered, so quiet even he barely heard it over the rain. "No, that ain't possible." Sarah stirred against him then, her eyelids fluttering weakly, her lips parting on a breath that came out as barely more than a whisper. "Mama," she murmured, lost somewhere between consciousness and the dark. "Mama, is that you?" Tank's whole body went rigid. "What did you say her mama's name was, boy?" he asked, though his voice came out rough, cracked open with something that felt too much like fear. Danny blinked against the rain, confused by the sudden urgency in Tank's voice. "Ruthie," he said. Her name was Ruthie. Ruthie Callahan. Why? Tank stood frozen in the storm, rain running down his face, Sarah limp in his arms, Danny clinging to his back, and the whole world tilted sideways beneath his boots. Tank's legs found their strength again, though his mind was still back under that oak tree, 20 years gone. He forced his boots to move, one after another, mud sucking at his heels, rain hammering his shoulders like it was trying to push him down. He would not go down. Not now. "Ruthie Callahan," he said again, testing the name in his mouth like it might break something if he said it wrong. "Her mama was Ruthie Callahan." "Yeah," Danny said, his voice barely a whisper now, his cheek pressed cold and clammy against Tank's neck. "You know her or something?" Tank didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat had closed up tight, and if he opened his mouth again, he wasn't sure what would come out. A sob or a shout or 20 years of buried grief all at once. Instead, he tightened his grip on Sarah, feeling the shallow rise and fall of her chest against his own, and he walked faster. The trees were thinning now. He could feel it before he could see it. The way the wind changed, the way the rain came down harder without the canopy to catch it. And then, through the black tangle of branches, he saw it. Lights, far off, small as a handful of stars fallen to earth, but lights all the same. The hospital. He knew that glow, had seen it 100 times riding past on quiet nights when sleep wouldn't come. Never once had it looked so much like a miracle. "There," he said, and his voice came out rough but steady. "You see that, Danny? Those lights? That's it. That's where we're going." Danny lifted his head just enough to look, and Tank felt something in the boy's small body loosen, just a fraction, like relief was trying to settle into muscles too cold and tired to hold it. "We're almost there," Danny mumbled. "We're almost there, Mom." He said it like a prayer, like if he said it enough times it would make his mother's eyes open, make her arms move, make everything be okay. Tank picked up his pace, ignoring the burn in his thighs, the ache that had settled deep into his back hours ago and never left. Sarah was a solid weight against his chest, growing heavier with every step, but he would not put her down. Could not. Not when they were this close. The rain seemed to ease, just slightly, as if the storm itself sensed they were nearing the end of it. Tank's boots found firmer ground, the mud giving way to something closer to solid earth, and the lights ahead grew brighter, close enough now that he could make out the shape of the building, a low, wide structure with windows lit up yellow against the dark. "Almost there," he said again, more to himself than to Danny now. "Almost there, boy. You hang on." But Danny's grip around his neck had gone slack. Tank noticed it the way you notice a missing sound, a silence where there should be noise. The boy's arms, which had been locked tight around his shoulders for the better part of an hour, had gone loose, sliding just slightly down his back. "Danny?" No answer. "Danny, you with me?" Still nothing. Tank could feel the boy's breath against his neck, shallow and quick, but his body had gone heavy, the kind of heavy that came from more than just tired legs. "Hey." Tank stopped walking, his heart slamming hard against his ribs. "Hey, Danny, stay with me now." The boy's head lolled to the side, his lips tinged a pale bluish gray that hadn't been there before. His skin, when Tank reached back to touch his cheek, was ice cold, colder than the rain, colder than it had any right to be. Hypothermia, exhaustion. The boy had been fighting it for miles, staying awake through sheer, stubborn will, and now his body had finally given out. Tank stood there in the mud, the hospital lights glowing warm and impossible just through the last stretch of trees. Sarah limp and bleeding in his arms, Danny gone still and cold against his back, and for the first time all night, Tank Morrison did not know what to do. He could not carry them both. Not fast enough, not safely, not both at once. Tank's mind raced, but only for a second. There was no time for anything else. He looked down at Sarah's pale face, then twisted his head to look at Danny, hanging limp against his back, and he knew what he had to do. "Okay," he said, his voice low and rough. "Okay, boy, I got you." He found a spot just off the path where the ground dipped down into a culvert, a long concrete tunnel built to carry rainwater under an old service road. It was dry inside, tucked back from the worst of the wind, and it was the best shelter he was going to find out here in the dark. He knelt down slow, careful, shifting Sarah's weight onto one arm so he could reach back and pull Danny around to his front. The boy's head rolled to the side, his eyes fluttering half open, glassy and unfocused. "Hey," Tank said, keeping his voice gentle now, the same voice he might use to calm a spooked horse. "Hey, Danny, I need you to hear me, okay? Just for a second." Danny's lips moved, but no sound came out. Tank shrugged out of his leather jacket, the one that still had Sarah's blood soaked into the sleeve, and he wrapped it around the boy's small body, tucking it tight around his shoulders, folding the collar up around his neck to keep the wind off. The jacket swallowed him whole, hung off him like a blanket, but it was warm from Tank's own body heat, and that was what mattered. "I'm gonna put you right here," Tank said, laying Danny down inside the culvert on the driest patch of ground he could find. "Nice and dry, out of the wind. You understand me?" Danny's eyes opened just a little wider, and for a moment there was fear there, raw and real, the same fear Tank had seen back at the wreck. "Don't," Danny's voice was barely a whisper. "Don't leave us." Something in Tank's chest cracked wide open. "I'm not leaving you," he said, and he meant it with everything he had left in him. "I am going to get your mama to the hospital, and then I am coming right back for you. You hear me? I am coming back." Danny's eyes searched his face, like he was trying to decide if he could believe him. Whatever he saw there must have been enough, because his body went still, some of the fight draining out of him, replaced by trust. "You stay right here," Tank said. "You stay put, and you keep breathing, and you wait for me. Can you do that?" Danny gave the smallest nod, his chin barely moving. "Good boy." Tank squeezed his small shoulder once, hard enough to mean it. Then he stood, and his knees screamed at him, and his back screamed louder, but he did not let either one slow him down. He looked at the boy one more time, curled up small inside the too big jacket, disappearing into the shadows of the culvert, and he made himself turn away. "I'm coming back," he said again, mostly to himself now, like a vow carved into stone. Then he ran. Sarah's weight against his chest felt heavier now, without Danny's added burden balancing him from behind. But Tank did not slow. He pushed through the last stretch of trees, branches clawing at his arms, mud sucking at his boots, the hospital lights growing brighter and closer with every stride until they filled his whole vision. He broke free of the tree line onto a gravel service road, and there, just ahead, was the rear entrance of the hospital, a metal door under a dim security light, a small overhang barely keeping the rain off. "Help!" Tank's voice tore out of him, raw and desperate, echoing off the brick walls. "Somebody help me!" A night watchman, an older man in a rain slicker, spun around from his post near the door, his flashlight beam swinging wildly before landing on Tank. "I need help!" Tank shouted again, staggering forward, Sarah limp in his arms, rain streaming down both their faces. "She's hurt bad. She needs a doctor now." The watchman didn't hesitate. He was already moving, already shouting back into the building, already reaching for the door. The doors burst open and light spilled out onto the wet gravel. Nurses in blue scrubs rushed forward with a gurney, and hands that knew exactly what to do took Sarah from Tank's arms. "Gunshot wound. No, car wreck," Tank stammered, his mind still stuck back on the road, back in the twisted metal. "Bleeding bad left side. I put a tourniquet on with my jacket. It's soaked through." "We got her," a nurse said, already checking Sarah's pulse, already moving with the gurney back through the doors. "Sir, you need to sit down. You're bleeding too." Tank looked down at his own arms, scratched raw by branches, his hands split open from prying the car door apart with nothing but his own strength. He hadn't even felt it until now. "I'm fine," he said, and it came out harder than he meant it to. "There's a boy, her son. He's back in the woods, in a culvert half a mile out. He's cold, he's scared, and I told him I'd come back for him." The watchman's eyes went wide. "Half a mile? In this storm?" "I know where he is." Tank was already backing away from the door, his legs shaking under him, his lungs still burning from the run. "I'm going back." "Sir, you can barely stand." "I said I'm going back." There was no room for argument in his voice, and something in his face must have told the watchman not to try. The man just nodded, already reaching for his radio. "I'll send someone out after you. Which way?" "Follow the tree line east, past the old service road. You'll see my tracks." Tank didn't wait for a response. He turned and ran back into the rain. His body wanted to quit. Every muscle screamed at him to stop, to rest, to let someone else go get the boy. His knees felt like they might give out with every step, and his lungs dragged in air that felt too thin, too cold. But none of that mattered. He had made a promise, and Tank Morrison had spent 45 years learning that a promise was the one thing in this world you did not break, no matter what it cost you. The woods swallowed him again, dark and dripping, the storm easing now but still spitting rain down through the branches. He retraced his own path, following the broken twigs and torn earth where his boots had already crashed through once before. His chest burned. His arms, cut and bruised, throbbed with every swing at his sides. He didn't slow down. "Danny," he called out into the dark, his voice cracking. "Danny, I'm coming!" Silence answered him, broken only by the drip of water off the leaves and the distant rumble of thunder rolling away from them now, the storm finally moving on. Then he saw it. The culvert, half hidden behind a fallen log, exactly where he'd left it. He dropped to his knees in the mud and crawled halfway inside, his hands shaking as he reached for the small shape curled up in the corner. "Danny," his voice broke on the name. "Danny, hey, I'm here." The boy didn't move at first, and Tank's heart stopped cold in his chest, terror gripping him harder than anything he'd felt all night. Then Danny stirred, a small shiver running through him, his eyes fluttering open just enough to catch the dim shape of Tank's face above him. "You came back," Danny whispered, his voice barely a breath. "Told you I would." Tank scooped him up, jacket and all, cradling him against his chest the same way he'd carried Sarah. The boy was freezing, his lips tinged blue, but he was breathing. He was alive, and that was all that mattered right now. Tank rose to his feet, ignoring the fresh scream of pain through his knees, and started back toward the hospital lights glowing through the trees. Danny's small hand found the front of Tank's shirt, fingers curling weakly into the fabric, holding on with what little strength he had left. "Thank you," the boy whispered, so quiet Tank almost missed it over the sound of the rain. Tank held him tighter and kept walking, his eyes stinging with something that wasn't just rain. The waiting room smelled like coffee and bleach. Tank sat in a plastic chair that was too small for him, his knees jutting up almost to the height of the little table in front of him, and Danny sat pressed against his side, wrapped in 2 hospital blankets, still shivering even though the worst of the cold had passed. A nurse knelt in front of the boy, shining a small light into his eyes, checking his fingers and toes for any sign of frostbite. "You're one lucky young man," she said, her voice soft and warm, the kind of voice made for talking to scared kids. "Your body temperature's coming back up nice and steady. You did real good hanging in there." Danny didn't answer. He just leaned harder into Tank's arm, his eyes half open, watching the nurse with the exhausted stare of a kid who had been through more in one night than most people went through in a year. "He's a tough one," Tank said, and his voice came out rougher than he meant it to, worn down from all the shouting into the storm, all the running. The nurse smiled up at him. "So are you, from the look of it." She nodded toward his hands, which someone had already wrapped in gauze, the cuts cleaned but still stinging under the bandages. "You should let someone look at those knees, too. You're limping." "I'm fine," Tank said again, the same words he'd said an hour ago, and the nurse just shook her head like she'd heard that particular lie 1,000 times before, and knew better than to argue with a man built like a mountain. Another nurse came through the double doors then, her scrubs a little rumpled, a clipboard in her hand, and Tank's whole body went still, waiting. "She's stable," the nurse said, and Tank felt something in his chest loosen just slightly, though not all the way. Not yet. "We got the bleeding under control. She's in surgery now. They're repairing some internal damage from the crash, but her vitals are good. Strong heartbeat. She's a fighter." "Can I see her?" Tank asked, and then caught himself, because it wasn't his place, was it? He was just the man who happened to find them on the road. "I mean, is there someone I should call? Family?" The nurse glanced at her clipboard. "We're still trying to locate next of kin. For now, all we can do is wait." She looked at Danny, tucked against Tank's side, and something in her face softened. "You two aren't going anywhere, are you?" "No, ma'am," Tank said. "We're not going anywhere." The nurse nodded and disappeared back through the doors, and the waiting room settled into that particular kind of quiet that hospitals had late at night. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the distant beep of some machine down the hall, the occasional squeak of shoes on tile floor. Danny shifted against Tank's arm. "Is my mom going to be okay?" Tank looked down at him, at the dark circles under the boy's eyes, at the way his small hands were still curled tight into the blanket, like he was afraid to let go of anything ever again. "Yeah," Tank said, and he meant it with everything he had, even though there was no way to know for certain, not yet. "Your mom's tough, just like you." Danny didn't say anything else. His eyelids grew heavier, blinking slower and slower, and within a few minutes, his breathing evened out into the steady rhythm of sleep, his head resting against Tank's arm, his small body finally still after a night of nothing but fear and cold and running. Tank sat there in the quiet, feeling the weight of the boy against him, feeling the ache in his own bones settle deep into his muscles now that there was nothing left to do but wait. He thought about Sarah's face, pale and still, back on that rain-slicked road. He thought about the wolf pendant around her neck, the one that matched the one he'd given Ruthie all those years ago. He thought about promises, and about the ones he'd already kept tonight, and the ones he still needed to keep. Tank closed his eyes. He hadn't prayed in 20 years, not since the day Ruthie's family drove him off with lies and money he never wanted. But sitting there in that hard plastic chair, with Danny's small weight against his arm, and the hospital lights humming overhead, he bowed his head anyway. "Please," he thought, the word feeling foreign and clumsy in his mind after so many years of silence. "Please let her be okay." Tank woke with a start, the kind of waking where the body jerks before the mind catches up. For a second he didn't know where he was. Then the smell of coffee and bleach came back to him, and the ache in his knees, and the small, warm weight still pressed against his side. Danny hadn't moved all night. His head had slid down to rest on Tank's arm, and one hand was still fisted in the blanket, holding on even in his sleep. Morning light was coming through the windows now, pale and gray at first, then turning gold as the sun climbed higher over the parking lot. It cut through the blinds in thin stripes across the waiting room floor. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rattled by. A phone rang once, twice, and stopped. Tank rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the stubble there, feeling how tired he was down in his bones. His neck was stiff from sleeping sitting up. His hands throbbed under the gauze. But none of that mattered much, not compared to the question that had been sitting in his chest all night like a stone. He looked up, and there she was. The same nurse from before, walking toward him with that same clipboard tucked against her chest, her scrubs a little less rumpled now, like she'd had a chance to catch her breath somewhere in the hours between midnight and dawn. Tank sat up straighter, careful not to jostle Danny, his heart suddenly pounding hard enough that he could feel it in his throat. "Mr. Morrison?" the nurse said. And she was smiling, actually smiling, and something in Tank's chest cracked open with hope before she even said another word. "I've got good news." "Tell me," Tank said, and his voice came out low and rough, barely more than a whisper, like he was afraid saying it too loud might jinx it somehow. "She made it through surgery just fine," the nurse said. "The internal bleeding is stopped. Her vitals have been strong and steady all night. The doctors are saying she's going to make a full recovery." She paused, letting that sink in, watching Tank's face like she wanted to see it land. "It's going to take some time. She'll need rest, and there'll be some healing ahead of her. But she's going to be okay, Mr. Morrison. Your friend is going to be just fine." Tank felt the words hit him like a wave. All that fear and worry he'd been carrying since he first saw the headlights catch that twisted metal on the road, all of it breaking loose at once. He closed his eyes and let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for hours. "Thank you," he said, and his voice cracked on the words. "Thank you. You should thank yourself," the nurse said gently. "The doctor said if she'd gotten here even 30 minutes later, things could have gone very differently. You saved her life last night. Both of them." Tank didn't know what to say to that. He just nodded, his throat too tight for words. Beside him, Danny stirred. His eyes fluttered open, still heavy with sleep, and for a moment he just blinked up at the ceiling, confused, the way kids get when they wake up somewhere that isn't their own bed. "Tank?" he mumbled. "Hey, buddy," Tank said, and even though his voice was still thick with emotion, he made himself smile down at the boy. "I got some news for you." Danny sat up slow, rubbing at his eyes with the back of his hand, the blanket sliding down off his shoulders. "What news?" "Your mom's okay," Tank said, and he watched the words land on Danny's face in slow motion, watched the boy's sleepy confusion turn into something else, something bright and disbelieving. "She's gonna be just fine, Danny. She made it." For a second, Danny just stared at him, like he needed a moment to understand what he was hearing. Then his whole face crumpled, his chin trembling, his eyes filling up fast. "She's okay?" he said, his voice small and shaking. "Really?" "Really," Tank said. And that was all it took. Danny threw his arms around Tank's middle and burst into tears, the kind of tears that come after holding something in for far too long, sobbing into Tank's side, while the nurse stood there watching with a soft, understanding smile, and the morning light kept pouring gold through the windows behind them. Tank held Danny's hand as they walked down the hallway, the boy practically vibrating with excitement, tugging Tank forward like a dog on a leash. "Slow down there, partner," Tank said, though he couldn't help the smile tugging at his own mouth. His knees still ached, his hands were still wrapped in white gauze, and he hadn't slept more than a few broken hours all night. But none of that mattered. Not now. The nurse led them to room 214 and pushed the door open gently. "Just a few minutes," she said. "She's still weak, and the medication makes her drowsy. Don't tire her out." Danny didn't wait. He darted past the nurse's legs and ran to the bed. "Mom?" Sarah Whitfield lay propped against a stack of pillows, tubes running from her arm to a bag hanging on a metal pole beside her. Her face was pale, a bruise blooming purple along one cheekbone, and there was a bandage wrapped around her forehead. But her eyes were open. And when she saw Danny, something in her face lit up, tired as she was. "Danny," she whispered, her voice cracked and dry. She lifted a hand, the one without the IV, and Danny grabbed it with both of his own small hands like he'd never let go again. "Baby, are you okay? Are you hurt?" "I'm okay, Mom, I'm okay. You're the one who got hurt. You scared me so bad." "I'm sorry, baby." Her eyes filled with tears, and she pulled him closer, pressing a kiss to the top of his head, careful of the tubes and wires. "I'm so sorry." Tank hung back near the doorway, feeling suddenly out of place, like maybe he shouldn't be there for this. This was a mother and son moment, something private and tender, and he was just some stranger who happened to be standing in a hallway in the rain last night. But Sarah looked up then, over Danny's head, and her eyes found Tank standing there in his leather jacket, his big frame filling up the doorway. Confusion crossed her face. "Who?" she started, her voice weak, her brow furrowing like she was trying to piece together something that wouldn't quite come into focus. "Who are you?" "Mom, this is Tank," Danny said, pulling back from her a little, his face bright with the kind of hero worship only an 8-year-old boy could manage. "He saved you. He carried you and me both out of the woods in the storm. He wouldn't leave us. Not even for a second." Sarah's eyes stayed on Tank, studying him, taking in the leather vest, the gray in his beard, the bandaged hands. "You carried us," she repeated slowly, like she was testing the words. "Out of the woods." "Yes, ma'am," Tank said, stepping forward just a little, keeping his voice low and gentle, the way he might talk to a spooked horse. "Found your car off the back road. Bridge was out, storm had everything flooded, so I got you and your boy out the only way I could figure, on foot." I don't remember much," Sarah said, her hand coming up to touch her bandaged head. "Just rain. And cold. And somebody's voice telling me to hold on." Her eyes searched his face again. Something flickering there. Some kind of recognition she couldn't quite place. "Thank you. I don't even know how to thank you enough." "You don't have to thank me," Tank said. "I just did what anybody would have done." "Not anybody," Sarah said quietly. "Not like that?" Tank shifted his weight, feeling the words sit heavy in his chest, feeling like there was something more he needed to say, but wasn't sure how to start. He glanced down at Danny, who was watching him with those wide, trusting eyes, and something about that gave him the courage to keep going. "Ma'am," Tank said slowly, "your boy mentioned a necklace. Silver wolf on a chain. Said it came from your mama." Sarah's hand went instinctively to her throat, though the necklace wasn't there anymore. Probably cut away by paramedics, or lost somewhere in the wreck. "Yes," she said. "It was my mother's. Ruthie's." Tank felt his own heart stop in his chest. "Ruthie Callahan," he said, the name coming out rough, barely above a whisper. Sarah's eyes went wide, shock rippling across her tired face, and she pushed herself up straighter against the pillows, despite the tubes and the pain. "How do you know my mother's name?" she asked, her voice suddenly sharp with alarm. "Who are you? Tell me everything." Tank pulled the plastic chair closer to the bed, the legs scraping against the floor, and lowered himself down slow. His big hands, still wrapped in gauze, rested on his knees. He looked at Sarah for a long moment, like he was trying to find her mother's face somewhere in her tired eyes. 20 years ago, he started, his voice low and rough, I loved a woman named Ruthie Callahan, loved her more than anything I'd ever known before or since. Sarah's grip on Danny's hand tightened, but she didn't say a word. She just watched Tank, waiting. I was 25 then. Rode with the club already, same one I ride with now. Ruthie, she was different from anybody I'd ever met. Came from money. Big house, fancy family, the whole thing. Her daddy owned half the businesses in town. Tank shook his head, a small, sad smile tugging at his mouth. She didn't care about none of that, though. She used to sneak out just to ride on the back of my bike. Said it was the only time she felt free. Danny had gone quiet, sensing something serious in the air, and he leaned against his mother's side, watching Tank with wide eyes. We fell in love, Tank continued. Real love, the kind that don't come around twice in a man's life. I gave her a necklace, a little silver wolf on a chain, told her it was so she'd always remember I'd protect her, no matter what. His voice cracked just slightly on the last words, and he cleared his throat before going on. I was fixing to ask her to marry me, had it all planned out. What happened? Sarah whispered. Her father happened, Tank said, and there was no anger in his voice, just old, tired grief. Man like that, he didn't want his daughter running around with a biker. Didn't matter how much I loved her, or how much she loved me. He called me into his office one day, told me I wasn't good enough, told me if I really cared about Ruthie, I'd disappear and let her have the life she deserved. And you just left? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. He paid me, Tank admitted, shame heavy in his chest, even now, 20 years later. Told me it was for her own good. Said she'd already agreed to marry somebody else, somebody more suitable. Said she didn't want to see me again, didn't want a goodbye. I didn't believe it, not at first. But then a letter came, in her handwriting, saying just that. Said she was sorry, but it was over, and I shouldn't try to find her. Sarah's face had gone pale, paler than the bruising and the bandages could account for. That's not what happened, she said, so quiet Tank almost didn't hear it. Ma'am? My whole life, Sarah said, her voice rising now, thick with tears. I was told a biker abandoned my mother. Just up and left one day, no note, no goodbye, nothing. My grandfather told me that story 100 times. Said it's why she never trusted men after that. Why she married my father even though she never really loved him. He said the biker broke her heart and vanished like a coward. Tank felt something crack open inside his chest, old grief and fresh anger colliding all at once. That's a lie, he said. That's not what happened. I never left her, not by choice. Her daddy forged that letter. Had to be him. There's no other way she would have known to write those words. Word for word what he told me himself. Sarah's hand came up to cover her mouth, her eyes filling with tears that spilled over onto her bruised cheeks. He lied, she whispered. He lied to her. He lied to me. All these years, I thought. She couldn't finish the sentence, her voice breaking apart. Tank sat there, feeling the weight of it all settling over him. 20 years of believing he'd been thrown away, believing he hadn't been good enough. All of it built on a lie one wealthy man told to protect his family name. Sarah reached out then, her hand shaking, and gripped Tank's bandaged fingers tight, tears streaming freely down her face now. Thank you, she said, her voice breaking. Thank you for finding us. Thank you for not giving up on us, the way he made everyone believe you gave up on her. The hospital cafeteria smelled like burnt coffee and warm syrup. Tank walked slow so Danny could keep pace beside him, the boy's sneakers squeaking on the tile floor. Danny had a blanket still wrapped around his shoulders like a cape. even though he wasn't cold anymore. He just liked having it there. They got a tray each. Tank piled his high with eggs and bacon and toast, the way a man does when he's been up all night and his body finally remembers it's hungry. Danny picked a plate of pancakes, 3 of them stacked up, and a little cup of orange juice that he held with both hands like it might spill if he wasn't careful. They found a table by the window, sunlight coming through in a long yellow strip across the tabletop. Tank folded himself into the small plastic chair, his knees bumping the underside of the table, and Danny climbed up across from him, kneeling on the seat so he could reach his food better. "You want syrup?" Tank asked, sliding the little plastic bottle over. "Yes, please." Danny poured it on, way too much, the syrup pooling over the sides of his pancakes and running toward the edge of the plate. Tank didn't say anything about it. Some things weren't worth fixing. For a while, they just ate. The cafeteria buzzed around them, nurses coming through in scrubs, an old man reading a newspaper 2 tables over, the soft clatter of forks against plates. It felt normal, ordinary. After the night they'd had, ordinary felt like a gift. "You got syrup on your chin," Tank said. Danny wiped it off with the back of his hand, grinning. "You got egg in your beard." Tank laughed, a real laugh, deep and surprised, like it had been sitting in his chest a long time waiting for a reason to come out. He wiped his beard with a napkin. "Fair enough." Danny kicked his feet a little under the table, still kneeling on the chair. "Is my mom gonna be okay?" "She's gonna be just fine," Tank said, and he meant it. "Doctors say she needs rest, needs time to heal up. But she's tough. Tougher than she looks." "She's real tough," Danny agreed, nodding hard like he needed to convince himself of it too. "She never cries in front of me, not even when things are bad." "Sometimes," Tank said, "the toughest people are the ones who don't let you see them hurting. Don't mean they're not hurting. Just means they love you enough to hide it." Danny thought about that for a second, chewing his pancake slow. "Is that what you do? Hide it?" Tank looked at the boy for a long moment. Nobody had ever asked him something like that, so plain, so honest. "Yeah," he said finally. "Guess I do that too." They ate a while longer, quiet again, but it wasn't an uncomfortable quiet. It was the kind of quiet that came after 2 people had been through something together, and didn't need words to fill up every space. "Last night," Danny said, "I wasn't scared of you no more, after a while." "I noticed that." "You're not scary," Danny said. "Not really. You just look scary." Tank smiled, a small, crooked thing. "A lot of people say that." Danny stabbed another bite of pancake, syrup dripping off his fork. "My friend Bobby, his uncle rides a motorcycle. Not as big as yours, though. Bobby says his uncle lets him sit on it sometimes, in the driveway. Just sit on it, not ride it or nothing." Tank raised an eyebrow, seeing where this was headed and not minding one bit. "Can I see yours sometime?" Danny asked, looking up at him now, syrup on his chin again, eyes wide and hopeful in that way only kids could manage. "Your motorcycle. Can I visit it? Maybe sit on it like Bobby does?" Tank set his fork down. Something warm spread through his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Not since before Ruthie, before the letter, before 20 years of believing he wasn't good enough for anybody's family. "Yeah," Tank said, and the smile that came over his face was the first real one in years, the kind that reached all the way up into his eyes. "Yeah, buddy, you can visit my bike anytime you want." Danny grinned so big it nearly split his face in 2, and went back to his pancakes like the whole thing was already settled. Simple as that. Days folded into each other after that, each one a little brighter than the last. Tank showed up every morning, same time, boots heavy on the hospital tile. He never came empty-handed. First, it was a candy bar for Danny, tucked in his jacket pocket like a secret. Then it was a pack of trading cards, the kind with baseball players Danny had never heard of but collected anyway, because Tank collected them too, back when he was a kid. By Wednesday, Tank showed up with a small toy motorcycle, black and silver, no bigger than Danny's hand. "Found it at a shop downtown," Tank said, setting it on the little rolling table beside Sarah's bed. "Figured you needed something to hold you over till you can sit on the real one." Danny snatched it up and ran it across the blanket, covering his mother's legs, making engine noises low in his throat. Sarah watched with a soft smile, propped up against her pillows, color coming back into her cheeks a little more each day. The room itself had changed, too. What started as a sterile space with beeping machines and a single wilted flower arrangement from a co-worker had slowly filled up with life. Danny's drawings covered the wall by the window, crayon pictures of motorcycles and stick figures that were supposed to be Tank, tall and wide with a scribble of a beard. A deck of cards sat on the nightstand from an afternoon of Go Fish. A stuffed bear, one from some claim machine in the gift shop lobby, sat propped against Sarah's pillow. Tank pulled up the same plastic chair every day, the one that groaned under his weight, and sat close to the bed. Sometimes he told stories about the club, about rides he'd taken through the mountains, about the brothers who'd become his family over the years. Danny always wanted the wild ones, the ones with rainstorms and breakdowns and close calls. Sarah liked the quiet ones, the stories about small towns and diners and people Tank had helped along the way. "You do that a lot, huh?" she asked one afternoon. "Help people?" Tank shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "Just try to leave things better than I found them." By Friday, Sarah was strong enough to sit all the way up without help, the color back in her face, her voice steadier than it had been since the crash. The doctors said she was healing faster than expected. Stubborn, one of the nurses had called her, with a laugh and a shake of her head. Sarah had just smiled and said stubborn ran in the family. That evening, the sun dipping low and gold through the window blinds, Danny had fallen asleep in the chair by the bed, the toy motorcycle still clutched in his hand, his head tipped sideways against the cushion. Tank had draped his own jacket over the boy's shoulders, the leather too big for him, swallowing him up like a blanket. Sarah watched Tank do it, something tender moving across her face. "Tank," she said quietly, so as not to wake Danny. "Can I ask you something?" "Course." She was quiet a moment, her fingers picking at the edge of her blanket. "Do you believe in fate? Like that things happen for a reason?" Tank sat back down, slow, the chair creaking beneath him. "Didn't used to," he admitted. "Spent a long time thinking things just happened. Good or bad, no rhyme or reason to it." "And now?" He looked over at Danny, sleeping soundly, the jacket rising and falling with his breath. Then back at Sarah, her eyes soft in the lamplight. "Now I don't know how else to explain it. Storm washing out that bridge, me being on that road at that exact minute, your boy's necklace." He shook his head slow. "Too many things lined up just right. Feels like more than luck." Sarah's eyes were wet now, but she was smiling. "I keep thinking about it. If you hadn't been driving by, if you hadn't stopped." Her voice caught, and she pressed a hand to her chest like she could steady the feeling there. "I don't know what would have happened to us." "Don't have to think about that," Tank said gently. "I was there. That's all that matters." "I'm grateful," Sarah whispered. "For all of it. For you." The room was quiet except for Danny's slow breathing and the soft hum of the machines. For a moment, nothing else existed outside those walls. Just the three of them, together, whole. Morning light spilled through the blinds, bright and clean after so many gray days. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, already dressed in real clothes instead of a hospital gown, a soft blue sweater Tank had brought her the day before. Her bag was packed. Danny's drawings had been carefully peeled off the wall and rolled into a tube, tucked under his arm like a treasure map. "Home today?" Danny said, for maybe the 10th time that morning, like he needed to keep saying it to believe it. "Home today," Sarah agreed, smiling at him. Tank stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the two of them with a warmth he still wasn't quite used to feeling. 20 years of hard roads had taught him not to expect good mornings like this one. He was still learning how to hold on to them without flinching. A knock sounded at the door, brisk and professional. "Come in," Sarah called. The door opened, and a man stepped inside wearing a white coat over a blue-collared shirt, a stethoscope draped around his neck. He was tall, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair cut neat and short, and an easy, confident way of moving that came from years of walking hospital halls, like they belonged to him. "Morning," he said, smiling at Sarah, then at Danny, then giving Tank a polite nod. "I'm Dr. Marcus Callahan. I'll be the attending reviewing your chart before discharge today." Tank's brow furrowed at the name, something faint stirring in the back of his mind, but he brushed it aside. Callahan wasn't an uncommon name. Coincidence, probably. "Nice to meet you," Sarah said. "I think I'm just waiting on paperwork at this point." "That's right," Marcus said, moving toward the bed, a tablet tucked under one arm. "Just want to double-check everything before we send you off. You've healed up faster than most of my patients, if I'm being honest." "Stubborn," Sarah said with a small laugh. "Runs in the family." Marcus chuckled, setting the tablet down on the rolling table. He glanced at the monitor beside the bed, checking numbers, humming softly to himself the way doctors do when they're thinking. Danny watched him with open curiosity, still clutching his rolled-up drawings. "You a real doctor?" Danny asked. "Like surgery and stuff?" "Something like that," Marcus said, smiling down at him. "I mostly fix people up after bad days, kind of like what it sounds like you all had." "Tank fixed us up first," Danny said proudly. "He's the one who found us." Marcus glanced over at Tank with new interest, the kind of look people gave when they were putting a story together. "That so? I heard bits of it from the nurses. Quite a night." Tank gave a small nod, still leaning against the window, feeling suddenly like an outsider in the room, though he couldn't say why. Something about the young doctor's voice, maybe, or the shape of his jaw. He shook the feeling off again. "Let's just check this IV line one more time," Marcus said, turning back to Sarah. "And then you're all set to go home." He reached across the bed, fingers steady and practiced, adjusting the tape at Sarah's wrist. As he leaned in, his sleeve slid up his forearm, the fabric bunching near his elbow. And there it was. Faded now, softened by years, but unmistakable. A wolf's head, teeth bared, wrapped in a chain that circled up toward the elbow. The exact design, stroke for stroke, that lived stitched into the leather of Tank's old vest, the emblem worn by every man who'd ever ridden beside him 20 years ago. Tank's breath caught somewhere deep in his chest. The room around him seemed to tilt, sound falling away until all he could hear was his own heartbeat pounding hard and fast against his ribs. He stared at the tattoo, then at the man's face, searching for something he hadn't let himself look for in 20 years. The shape of the eyes, the set of the shoulders, things he'd buried so deep he'd convinced himself they didn't exist anymore. Marcus straightened up, sleeve falling back into place, completely unaware of the storm he'd just set loose in the room. "All set," he said, smiling easily at Sarah. "You're free to go home?" Tank didn't move. couldn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the young doctor's face, his mind scrambling to make sense of something too big, too impossible, too real to be anything but true. "Doc," Tank said, and his voice came out rougher than he meant it to. "Hold on a second." Marcus turned back from the doorway, one eyebrow raised. "Something wrong?" "That tattoo." Tank pushed off from the window, crossing the small room in 3 heavy steps. His boots felt too loud on the tile floor. "On your arm. Can I see it again?" Marcus glanced down at his own forearm, like he'd forgotten it was there. "This old thing?" "Sure." He pushed his sleeve up without hesitation, holding his arm out for Tank to look at. The wolf snarled up at him, teeth bared, chain wrapped tight around the whole design, just like Tank remembered it. Just like it had looked stitched into leather for 2 decades, his own club's mark, inked onto skin that wasn't his own, on a man he'd never met before this morning. Sarah had gone quiet on the bed, watching Tank's face. Even Danny had stopped fidgeting with his rolled-up drawings, sensing something heavy in the air, the way kids always seemed to know before anyone said a word. "Where'd you get that?" Tank asked. His voice had dropped low, careful, like he was afraid of breaking something if he spoke too loud. Marcus looked down at the tattoo again, and something softer moved across his face. "Got it when I turned 25. Kind of a personal thing." He pulled his sleeve back down, but didn't step away. "You a biker? I figured you might recognize the style. It's not exactly generic." "Recognize it," Tank said quietly. "Yeah, I'd say I recognize it." Marcus tilted his head, curious now, some part of him picking up on the strange weight in Tank's voice. "It's a tribute, actually, to my father." He said it plainly, the way people talk about things they've made peace with a long time ago. "Never knew him. My mom raised me on her own. Well, with my adoptive parents, but she always kept a photograph. Just one. A young guy on a motorcycle, leather jacket, this exact design stitched on the front." Tank's chest had gone tight, like someone was standing on it. He couldn't feel his own hands anymore. "She never told me his name," Marcus went on, and his voice softened even further, the professional edge falling away completely now. "Said it was complicated. Said maybe someday she'd explain it all, but she passed before she ever got the chance. Ovarian cancer, 6 years ago now." He paused, glancing briefly at the floor before looking back up. "I got the tattoo not long after the funeral. Felt like the only way I had to honor a man I never got to meet. My mother loved him. I could see it, even in just that one photo, the way she used to look at it." The room had gone completely silent, except for the soft beeping of machines still hooked up in the corner. Sarah's eyes had gone wide, flicking between Marcus and Tank, some understanding starting to dawn on her face, though she hadn't said a word yet. "Your mother," Tank said, and his voice cracked right down the middle. "What was her name?" "Ruthie," Marcus said. "Ruthie Callahan." The name landed like a physical blow. Tank's knees nearly buckled, and he had to reach out and grab the metal railing at the foot of the bed just to stay upright. 20 years of grief, of believing he'd been thrown away and forgotten, of nights spent wondering what he'd done wrong to lose a woman he'd loved so completely. All of it came rushing up at once, crashing into a truth he never could have imagined. Ruthie hadn't just left him. She'd been carrying his son. A son he'd never known existed. A son who'd grown up without him, wondering about a photograph of a stranger on a motorcycle, never knowing that stranger had spent 2 decades thinking he'd been rejected, unworthy, forgotten. Marcus was watching him now with growing concern, his doctor's instincts kicking in at the sight of a grown man swaying on his feet. "Sir? You all right? Do you need to sit down?" Tank stared at him, really stared, searching his face for every trace of Ruthie he could find. And now that he was looking, really looking, he saw it everywhere. The eyes, the set of the jaw, the same gentle stubbornness he'd fallen in love with 20 years ago, staring back at him from a face that hadn't existed the last time he'd seen her. "Marcus," Tank said, and the name felt strange and enormous in his mouth. "I need you to listen to me very carefully." Marcus's brow furrowed. "Okay," he said slowly, doctor instincts still humming under the surface, telling him to watch this big man's color, his breathing. "I'm listening." Tank gripped the railing tighter. His knuckles had gone white. 20 years ago, I loved a woman named Ruthie Callahan. We were going to get married. Her family didn't approve of me. Said I wasn't good enough. Said a Hell's Angel had no business with their daughter. His voice cracked on the word daughter. One day I came to see her, and her father met me on the porch instead. Told me she didn't want to see me anymore. Handed me a letter. Said it was from her. Said she'd married someone else, moved on, wanted nothing to do with me. Marcus had gone very still. "I believed it," Tank said. "For 20 years I believed it. Never questioned it, not really. Just figured I wasn't the kind of man a girl like that could love forever. Figured her family was right about me." "That's not—" Marcus started, then stopped himself, his jaw tightening. He looked over at Sarah, then back at Tank, something dawning behind his eyes, something he wasn't ready to say out loud yet. "Tell me about her," Tank said. "Please, tell me what happened to her." Marcus let out a slow breath, the kind that seemed to carry years of confusion finally finding a place to land. He pulled the chair from the corner of the room closer and sat down, like his legs needed the support even if he wouldn't admit it. "My mom never talked about my father, not directly, but there were pieces, things I picked up over the years." He rubbed a hand over his face. "She told me once that her family sent her away when she got pregnant. Packed her off to live with a cousin 2 states over before she even started showing. Said they told everyone back home she was going to some fancy school. Nobody knew the truth except her parents." Tank's stomach turned over. "She was pregnant," he said quietly. "When they ran me off, she was already pregnant." "She never told the father," Marcus said, and there was an old ache in his voice, one that had clearly lived there a long time. "That's what she always said, that he never knew, that it wasn't his fault, whatever had happened between them. She made sure I understood that part, even as a kid. She'd say, 'Don't you ever blame him, Marcus. He didn't walk away. He never even got the choice.'" The room seemed to tilt around Tank. Sarah had a hand pressed to her mouth, tears standing in her eyes now, understanding crashing over her the same way it was crashing over him. "She raised you alone?" Tank asked, though the doctor's own words moments ago had already told him the answer. "With my adoptive parents," Marcus said. "She gave me to a good family, a doctor and his wife who couldn't have kids of their own. But she stayed close, visited every chance she got. I always thought of her as an aunt growing up, until I got older, and she finally told me the truth, that she was my mother, that she'd had to give me up because her family wouldn't let her keep me, wouldn't let her be with the man she loved." He shook his head slowly. "I was so angry with her family. Still am, if I'm honest." Tank couldn't speak. His throat had closed up entirely. "She passed 6 years ago," Marcus continued, softer now. "Ovarian cancer, like I said. Toward the end, she started writing letters, a whole stack of them. Wouldn't tell me who they were for, just said to keep them safe, that maybe someday they'd matter. She said, and I remember this exact, she said, for if this day ever came." Marcus looked up at Tank, and something like recognition finally broke across his face, raw and disbelieving. I never opened them. Never had a reason to. They're still at my apartment, in a box." The words hit Tank like a wave crashing over his head, joy and grief tangled so tight together he couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. 20 years of loss. And somewhere in a box in an apartment across town, Ruthie's voice was waiting to finally tell him the truth. He couldn't breathe. The walls of the small hospital room pressed in close, too full of feeling for his body to hold. "I need," Tank managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need some air." He turned and walked out of the room without another word. The automatic doors slid shut behind him, and the night air hit Tank's face like a slap. Cool, wet, real. He walked past the covered entrance, out where the awning ended, and let the light rain fall on him without bothering to pull up his hood. He needed to feel something on his skin that made sense. Tank found the low concrete wall that lined the edge of the parking lot and sat down hard, his big frame folding like something had cut the strings holding him up. He put his elbows on his knees and stared at his hands. 20 years these hands had gripped handlebars, thrown punches, buried 3 brothers from the club, held babies at christenings for other men's kids. 20 years. And the whole time, he had a son who grew up thinking of him as nothing, not even a memory, just an empty space where a father should have been. She never told the father, Marcus had said, that it wasn't his fault. Tank pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. The rain kept coming, soft and steady, running down his neck and under his collar. He didn't care. Let it soak him through. Let it wash something out of him if it could. He thought about Ruthie's father standing on that porch, the cold, flat way the old man had said, "She doesn't want to see you anymore." Tank had believed it because it was easier to believe than the alternative. Easier to think he wasn't good enough than to think someone had reached into his life and torn it apart on purpose. But that's exactly what had happened. A rich old man had decided a Hell's Angel wasn't fit to raise his grandson, and so he made sure that grandson never existed for Tank at all. 20 years of birthdays, 20 years of first steps and first words and skinned knees and report cards. Gone, stolen, not lost, not missed by accident. Taken. The anger came up through his chest like a fist, hot and sudden, and Tank had to press his lips together to keep from shouting into the empty parking lot. He wanted to hit something. He wanted to find that old man's grave, if he even had one yet, and scream at the dirt. But under the anger was something worse. Something that hurt in a place anger couldn't reach. Grief. Not just for the years he'd lost, but for Marcus. For the little boy Marcus must have been once, looking at other kids with their dads, wondering. Tank knew that particular ache. He'd felt something like it himself growing up without much of a father of his own. And now he'd find out he'd handed that same ache to his own son, without ever knowing he'd done it. He probably hates me, Tank thought. Or worse, he probably feels sorry for me. A grown man showing up now, wanting to be somebody's father after 34 years of nothing. What right did he have to walk back into Marcus's life? The man had a mother who loved him, adoptive parents who raised him right, a whole life built without Tank in it. A good life, from the sound of it. Steady, successful. What could Tank possibly offer him now except confusion and old wounds reopened? Maybe the kindest thing, Tank thought, was to let it be. Let Marcus keep the peace he'd built. Let the letters stay in that box, unopened, if that's what Marcus decided. Tank could go back to his life, his bike, his club. Sarah and Danny didn't need him tangled up in more heartbreak than they'd already survived tonight. He stood up, rain dripping off his beard, his jacket heavy and soaked through. His legs felt unsteady beneath him, like an old man's legs, though he wasn't old, not really. Just tired. Tired in a way sleep wouldn't fix. He took one step toward the parking lot, toward his bike, toward leaving before he could do any more damage to people who deserved better than the mess he carried. That's when he heard the door. Tank? He turned. Danny stood under the awning, a hospital blanket wrapped around his small shoulders, his bare feet pale against the wet concrete, hair still damp from the storm hours before. His eyes found Tank's in the dim light, steady and sure in a way that didn't belong to an 8-year-old who'd nearly lost his mother that same night. Danny, Tank's voice came out rough. You should be inside. It's cold out here and you're supposed to be resting. The boy didn't move. He stood there in his blanket like a small ghost, feet bare on the wet concrete, and he looked at Tank the way you look at someone you're not going to let get away. A nurse said I could come find you, Danny said. I told her it was important. Danny, you're leaving. It wasn't a question. Danny said it plain, the way kids say true things before they learn to soften them. I saw your face. You looked like you did right before you went back for me in the woods, like you were about to do something hard and sad at the same time. Tank opened his mouth to argue, to tell the boy he was wrong, but nothing came out. The rain kept falling between them, quiet and steady, and for a second neither of them said anything at all. Danny took a step forward, off the dry patch under the awning, right out into the rain with Tank. The water hit his hair and ran down his face, but he didn't flinch. Get back under there, Tank said. You'll catch your death. Not until you hear me. Something in the boy's voice stopped Tank cold. It wasn't a child's voice anymore, not in that moment. It was something older, something that had been through a storm and a wrecked car and a night in the woods, and had earned the right to speak like it mattered. When I was stuck in that culvert, Danny said, and it was dark, and I was so cold I couldn't feel my hands anymore, I kept thinking you weren't coming back. I kept thinking maybe you got my mom to the hospital and just forgot, or decided it was easier without me. That's what my brain kept telling me, over and over the whole time I was waiting. Tank's throat tightened. He remembered that culvert, the way he'd had to leave the boy there, the promise he'd made before he ran back into the storm. But you came back, Danny said. You came back for me even though it would have been so much easier not to, even though nobody would have blamed you if you didn't. You came back because you said you would. Rain dripped off Tank's beard. He didn't trust his own voice, so he just stood there and let the boy keep talking. So now you found out something hard, Danny said. Something about your son. And I don't understand all of it, not really. But I understand this part. You're standing out here thinking about leaving because it's easier. Because maybe you think Marcus doesn't need you messing up his life. The boy's chin came up, stubborn and sure. But you didn't leave us, Danny said. You didn't leave us in the woods, and you didn't leave my mom in that car, and you didn't leave me in that culvert. You don't get to leave now either. That's not who you are. I know that about you. I know it better than anybody. Tank stood in the rain and felt something crack open in his chest, wide and raw. He thought of all the years he'd spent believing he wasn't worth staying for. He thought of Ruthie's father on that porch, the lie that had shaped 2 decades of his life. And here was this small, soaked, shivering boy telling him the truth, plainer than anyone ever had. You don't get to leave now. Tank reached up and wiped his eyes, and it didn't matter that the rain was already running down his face, because Danny saw it anyway, saw the big man's shoulders shake once, just once, before he pulled himself back together. Okay, Tank said, and his voice cracked on the word. Okay, kid. He knelt down, right there in the rain, so he was eye level with Danny, and he put his hand on the boy's small shoulder, steady, and warm despite the cold. "Let's get you back inside before your mom has both our hides," Tank said. Danny almost smiled at that. A small, tired thing, but real. Tank stood, feeling the weight of the night settle differently on him now, lighter somehow, even though nothing about the truth had changed. He looked past Danny, through the glass doors, toward the light inside, toward the corridor where Marcus was probably still standing, waiting for an answer Tank hadn't given him yet. He put his hand on Danny's back and walked him toward the entrance, the automatic doors sliding open to welcome them both back into the warmth. The doors slid shut behind them, and the warmth of the hospital hit Tank like a wall after the cold rain outside. Danny's bare feet slapped softly against the tile as a nurse hurried over, scooping the boy up in a fresh blanket and scolding him gently about wandering off. Danny looked back once at Tank before he was carried down the hall toward Sarah's room, and something in his eyes said, "I meant every word." Tank stood dripping in the hallway, and that's when he saw Marcus. The young doctor was still in his scrubs, but he'd changed out of them into a plain gray sweater that made him look less like a physician and more like a man waiting for something he was scared to want. He held a small bundle in his hands, tied with a faded ribbon that had once been blue, but had gone the color of old newspaper. Letters. A dozen of them, maybe more. The paper soft at the edges from being folded and unfolded 100 times. "I went home," Marcus said. His voice was quiet, careful, like he was testing whether Tank would still be standing there when he looked up. "After my shift ended. I have a break. I went and got these." Tank didn't say anything. He couldn't. "My mother left them for me," Marcus said. "After she passed. There was a box in her closet and a note on top that said not to open it unless the day came when I needed to understand something about myself. I read them once, a long time ago, and then I put them away because I didn't know what to do with what they told me. I didn't know if the man in them was even alive." He held the bundle out, both hands, like an offering. "I think he is," Marcus said. Tank took the letters like they might break in his hands. They were light, so light for something that carried 20 years of buried truth. There was a small office just off the hallway, meant for consultations, quiet and dim with a single lamp on the desk. Marcus led him there without a word, and they sat across from each other, the bundle of letters between them like something sacred. Tank untied the ribbon with fingers that weren't quite steady. The first letter was dated 3 months after he'd left. In handwriting he would have known anywhere, round and careful, the same hand that had once written his name on a birthday card he'd kept in his jacket pocket for years, until it fell apart. "My father says you are gone, that you did not even say goodbye. I do not believe it. I will never believe it. But I am carrying your son now, and I have nowhere to go and no one will listen to me. I am so afraid, Tank. I am so afraid and so alone." Tank's hands shook. He kept reading. Letter after letter, the same aching honesty. Ruthie writing about the family that shipped her off to a relative's house 3 states away. How they told everyone she'd gone to study abroad. How they intercepted every piece of mail she tried to send. How her father had shown her a forged letter in Tank's handwriting, cruel and cold, saying he never wanted her or the baby. I knew it wasn't true. I knew his hand better than my own. But by then it did not matter. They had already decided everything. Near the bottom of the stack was a photograph, worn soft at the corners. Tank himself, 25 years old, leaning against his old Harley, laughing at something out of frame, his eyes crinkled with a joy he barely remembered having. The last letter was different, written in a shakier hand, clearly years later. If you are reading this, Marcus, Then I am gone, and I am sorry I never had the courage to tell you while I could still see your face when I did. Your father did not abandon us. He was stolen from us, and I let it happen because I was young and scared, and my family had all the power. I have loved him every day since, even after I built a life with someone else. I hope someday, if fate is kind, you will find him. I hope you will see the kindness in his eyes that I saw. I hope he forgives me." Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, not bothering to hide it anymore. "I used to stare at that photograph when I was a kid," he said, voice thick. "I didn't know who he was. I just knew there was something about his eyes, something kind. I used to wonder about him all the time, who he was, where he'd gone, why he never came looking." "I never came looking because I never knew," Tank said quietly. "I want you to understand that. If I had known, nothing on this earth could have kept me away." Marcus nodded. He believed it. Somehow, sitting in that dim little office with the letters between them, he already believed it. That was 3 days ago. Now they sat at a small coffee shop 2 blocks from the hospital, a place with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu, the kind of spot Marcus said he came to when he needed to think. Tank felt too big for the little wooden chair, his leather vest out of place among the laptops and quiet chatter. But Marcus had picked the table by the window, and Tank wasn't about to argue about where he sat. "Tell me about her," Marcus said, wrapping both hands around his coffee cup like he needed something to hold on to. "My mother. Before all of it. Before her family." Tank stared out the window for a moment, watching the morning traffic crawl past, and let himself remember. "She laughed easy," he said. "That's the first thing I remember about her. I was fixing a bike outside a diner, and she was sitting on the curb eating a soft pretzel, and she laughed at something her friend said. And I looked up, and that was it. That was the whole thing right there. 25 years old, and I knew." Marcus smiled, small and real. "She used to laugh like that when I was a kid, even after everything, even after him." He didn't say his grandfather's name. He didn't need to. Tank told him about the summer they'd spent riding along the coast, about the wolf pendant he'd bought her from a shop in a beach town, about how her family had looked at him the first time he came to their house, like something they'd scraped off their shoe. He told him about the day her father had cornered him outside the garage where he worked, the envelope of cash, the threat wrapped up polite as a Sunday sermon. "You'll never be good enough for her. Take the money, disappear. It's kinder this way for everyone." "I didn't take it," Tank said. "Not at first. I fought for 2 more weeks. Then the letter came. Her handwriting, or close enough to fool me, saying she'd changed her mind, that she was ashamed she'd ever loved someone like me. I was young and stupid and heartbroken, and I believed it because it was easier than believing they could fake something so cruel." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "She spent her whole life thinking you left without a word," he said. "And you spent yours thinking the same about her. They stole 20 years from both of you, and never once had to answer for it." "They're not answering for it now either," Tank said. There wasn't much anger left in his voice, just tired old grief, worn smooth like a stone in a river. "Her father's been gone 8 years. There's no one left to be mad at except 2 people who never did anything wrong." They sat with that for a while, the coffee going lukewarm between them, the sounds of the shop humming around them like something far away. "I used to think there was something wrong with me," Marcus finally said. "Some hole I couldn't explain. My parents, my adoptive parents, they were good to me. I never wanted for anything. But there was always this question I couldn't answer, this space where an answer should have been." He looked up at Tank, and his eyes were wet again, but he wasn't hiding it this time. I don't know how to feel about everything that happened. I don't think I'll know for a long time, but I know that if none of it had happened, I wouldn't have ended up in that hospital hallway the same night you carried Danny and Sarah in from the storm." He reached across the table, and Tank realized his own hand was already halfway there. "I'm grateful," Marcus said, his voice breaking just slightly on the word. "For the pain, even. Because it led to this. It led to you." Tank stood up without thinking, and Marcus rose to meet him. And there, in the middle of the little coffee shop, in front of strangers who had no idea what 20 years of buried truth looked like, father and son held on to each other like they were afraid to let go. A week later, Sarah sat on the edge of her hospital bed, dressed in real clothes for the first time since the crash. Someone had brought her jeans and a soft blue sweater from home, and just putting them on had made her feel like a person again, instead of a patient. Her leg was still wrapped in a brace, and she'd need crutches for another few weeks, but the doctors had finally said the words she'd been waiting to hear. "You can go home." A nurse helped her into a wheelchair for the ride down, even though Sarah insisted she could walk. "Hospital rules," the nurse said, smiling. Sarah didn't argue much. She was too busy watching the doors slide open at the end of the hall, too busy waiting to see who was on the other side. She didn't have to wait long. Danny saw her first. He let out a yell that probably wasn't allowed in a hospital lobby and ran straight for her, nearly knocking the wheelchair backward as he threw his arms around her neck. "Mom, you're coming home! You're really coming home!" "I'm really coming home, baby." Sarah buried her face in his hair and breathed him in, and for a second she couldn't say anything else because her throat was too tight. Behind Danny stood Tank, still wearing his leather vest like always, arms crossed, trying and failing to look like a tough biker instead of a man who'd been counting down the days until this moment. Next to him stood Marcus in his white coat, a clipboard tucked under his arm. Though Sarah suspected he'd found any excuse to be in the lobby that morning instead of his office. "Look at you," Tank said, his voice rough with something he didn't try to hide. "Sitting up. Looking like yourself again." "I feel like myself again," Sarah said. "Mostly. This chair is a little humbling." "Rules are rules," Marcus said, stepping forward and crouching down beside her so he was eye level. "How's the leg?" "Sore, ugly. But mine." She smiled at him, and something passed between them. Something easy and warm, like the beginning of the family they were still learning how to be. "Thank you, Dr. Callahan." "Marcus," he corrected gently. "I think we're a little past Dr. Callahan." Danny pulled back from his mom's hug, just enough to look at Tank. "Can we go now? Can Tank carry the bags? He's really strong." "I heard that," Tank said, but he was already reaching for the small duffel bag sitting in Sarah's lap, slinging it easily over one shoulder like it weighed nothing at all. "Somebody's got to make sure you don't fall over trying to carry your own stuff, kid." "I'm 8, Danny said. "I can carry things." "Sure you can," Tank said, ruffling his hair, and Danny grinned up at him like the sun rose and set on that one gesture. The nurse wheeled Sarah toward the front doors, the little group falling into step around her, Danny holding tight to one side of the chair like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. Marcus walked close on her other side, and Tank brought up the rear, watching all 3 of them the way a man watches something he still can't quite believe is real. The automatic doors slid open, and the morning hit them all at once. Sunlight, bright and warm, poured down over the parking lot, glinting off car windows and puddles left over from the last of the rain. The storm that had nearly taken everything from them was long gone now, and the sky stretched out clear and blue overhead, not a cloud in sight. Sarah tilted her face up toward it and closed her eyes for a moment, just breathing. "First real sunshine in a week," she said. "Feels good, doesn't it?" Tank said, stepping up beside her chair. Feels like a miracle, she said honestly. Tank cleared his throat, and when Sarah opened her eyes, she saw something almost shy in his expression, which looked strange on a man his size. I was thinking, he said. The boys at the clubhouse, they've been asking about you three, wanting to meet you properly. I know it's a lot, all of us angels in one place, but I'd like to have you all out there. Cook some food, sit outside. Let Danny ride on the back of a parked bike if his mom says it's all right. Just celebrate, all of it. You coming home? Marcus, all of it. Sarah looked at Danny's hopeful face, then up at Marcus, who was already nodding, then back at Tank, standing there in the sunshine like he was bracing for her to say no. We'd love that, she said, smiling wide. We'd really love that. The clubhouse yard smelled like charcoal smoke and cut grass, and somebody had strung up old string lights between two oak trees, even though it wouldn't be dark for hours. Tables made from plywood and sawhorses stretched across the gravel lot, covered in checkered cloths and paper plates weighted down with rocks so the breeze wouldn't send them flying. Sarah sat in a lawn chair with her bad leg propped up on a cooler, watching the whole scene unfold like something out of a dream she didn't want to wake up from. Big men in leather vests were laughing around a smoking grill, arguing about whether the burgers needed another 2 minutes or were already perfect. A woman named Peaches, who Sarah had learned ran the front desk at the clubhouse and had a laugh that carried across the whole yard, kept refilling Sarah's lemonade before she even asked. You doing okay over here? Peaches asked, setting down a fresh plate of potato salad. Better than okay, Sarah said, and she meant it. 3 weeks ago, she'd been lying in a hospital bed wondering how she was going to rebuild her whole life. Now she was surrounded by people who felt, impossibly, like they'd always been there. Danny came tearing across the yard, cheeks red from running, a new leather vest hanging a little big on his small shoulders. One of the older bikers, a man everyone called Preacher, had sewn a small patch onto the front that morning while Danny watched with wide eyes. It read, Honorary Angel, in stitched white letters, and Danny hadn't taken the vest off since. Mom, look! Look what Preacher gave me! I've seen it about 100 times now, baby, Sarah laughed, and it looks amazing every single time. Danny beamed and ran off again to show somebody else, his sneakers kicking up little clouds of dust. Marcus stood near the grill, sleeves rolled up, listening to one of the club brothers explain the difference between 2 engines with the patience of a man who genuinely wanted to understand. He looked lighter here than Sarah had ever seen him at the hospital, like some weight he'd carried his whole life had finally been set down. Tank appeared at Sarah's side, 2 plates in hand, and passed her one loaded with more food than she could possibly eat. Figured you needed feeding up, he said. Hospital food's a crime against humanity. You're not wrong. She took a bite and let herself enjoy it, the noise and warmth of the yard settling into her bones. Tank, thank you, for all of this, for everything. He waved a hand like it was nothing, but his eyes were soft. Don't thank me, just glad you're here. Later, when the sun had dropped low enough to turn the sky orange and gold, Tank wiped his hands on a rag and walked over to the old motorcycle parked under the carport. A big black machine with chrome that had been polished so many times, it looked like glass. Come here a second, he called to Marcus. Time you learned something your old man's good at. Marcus laughed, but he came, wiping barbecue sauce off his fingers with a napkin. I've never even sat on one of these things. No time like the present. Tank swung a leg over the bike and settled into the seat, then patted the spot in front of the handlebars. Come on, I'll walk you through it slow. We're not going anywhere fast today. Marcus climbed on, a little stiff, a little unsure, but grinning despite himself. Tank guided his hands to the grips, showed him where the clutch was, the throttle, talked him through it in a low, steady voice that Sarah had come to recognize as the same one he'd used calming Danny down on the night of the crash. The engine rumbled to life, and Marcus jumped a little at the sound, laughing. "Easy," Tank said. "She's not gonna bite. Just ease off slow." The bike rolled forward a few feet, wobbling, and Marcus yelped, and Tank's booming laugh rang out across the yard as he steadied the handlebars with one hand. Danny ran over to stand beside his mother's chair, tugging at his new vest so the patch caught the last of the sunlight. "Mom, look, Marcus is riding it." "I see, baby." Sarah laughed, shading her eyes against the glow. "Sort of riding it." They wobbled another few feet, Tank's voice steady and encouraging, Marcus laughing every time the bike lurched, and Danny cheering like he was watching the greatest thing he'd ever seen. Tank looked over his shoulder once, just for a second, and caught Sarah's eye. Something passed between them, something that didn't need words. A broken family, found again after 20 long years, sitting together in the gold light of an ordinary evening that felt like anything but ordinary. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.